everybody. Welcome back to OTT Executive Podcast. This is Brian Mahoney, the president of the OTT Executive Community and CEO of Trend Research. We're continuing in our conversations with leaders of the industry. I'm very excited about today's conversation. Today, we're joined by Robert Schildhouse, the GM of BritBox North America. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, Brian. Nice to see you.
Great. Quick introductions on yourself, please. Background.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the GM of North America for BritBox, but my background in streaming really started at the beginning of what I'd call professionally produced content being streamed over the internet. I was part of the early team at Hulu. Actually, we celebrated the 15-year anniversary of the public launch of Hulu yesterday, which is March 12th.
Are you kidding? It's been that long? Wow.
It's amazing. It's hard to believe looking at all those young, fresh faces in the picture that was being bounced around via some text yesterday with some of the original Hulu team. But yeah, 15 years ago, we pressed play on that service. And I've been involved in the industry really ever since, leading the content acquisition efforts at Hulu from the beginning for probably about the first 5 years or so, moving over to CBS, where I was responsible for licensing content to the streaming services, really playing the other side of the table. And now over here at BritBox, delivering British content to the masses. So that's my focus is today.
That's great. Well, Robert, you're in a key position, having sort of experience with sort of the old school and the new school of content distribution in this crazy world of streaming, which continues to evolve. So I really would love for our conversation to tease out a little bit about the trends in the industry, and more importantly, I also know you have a finance background coming out of Harvard Business School. I want to talk about the economics of the industry, because I think that's sort of, we're at a key inflection point right now. And as you well know, the challenge of viewer acquisition and matching that to your content costs and distribution is really sort of the $64,000 question. So I'd love to get your high level insights. Where do you see the health of the industry right now? And maybe any insights about what might need to be tweaked or changed going forward to make it stronger?
Well, first of all, Brian, don't blow my cover, which you may have already done. I try to keep the finance part under wraps, or they bring me into some conversations that I'd rather stay away from. But those are excellent questions. I mean, you're reading the same information that I am. Mm-hmm. The amount of investment going in, and really the losses chasing the same subscribers across both the U.S. marketplace, but as well as the world. It's a very challenging business, especially in what I call the mainstream streaming market. And Netflix had an incredible first mover advantage, and they're in every market in the world. It also took them, a couple 100 million subscribers to get really on solid footing financially. A lot of the major media companies now that are trying to chase that same subscriber are discovering the challenges, especially when they have an old economy or an old media business attached to their business model and don't exactly get valued by Wall Street in the same way. My take on the business, and look, I love recurring revenue businesses. Subscription models are, you see it in just about every line of business there is today. And the challenge here, unfortunately, is just the cost of content is so extreme, and trying to satisfy many different audience types is a challenge. And where, frankly, I think you're going to see the most success here is streaming in the mainstream streaming category, is streaming in service of a broader ecosystem. So what you see at Amazon, they're never going to necessarily talk about a positive P&L in their streaming category, but if streaming helps people buy more paper towels, that's a good story for them. Apple can experiment for as long as they want in streaming and scoop up sports rights like MLS, like they've done recently. It's a multi-trillion-dollar company. They don't need to necessarily show a positive P&L in streaming, where some of the major media companies who have shifted their business models to go direct to consumer, that's where I think there's going to be some challenges. And I'll quote Bob Iger, who said in the past few weeks, in the context of Hulu, which we were just talking about a second ago, he sees concern in undifferentiated general entertainment programming. And that, I think that's the crux of what we're dealing with right now in a mature market in the States, that if you're dependent on hits, consumers have gotten really savvy around popping in and out of streaming services. So if something shows up on Peacock that you like, you can show up, subscribe, watch that quickly, and then you can churn out, and then go to Paramount Plus, and then go to Netflix, and maybe only hold on to a couple key services that you feel like you're getting a lot of utility out of, but sort of pop in and out of those other services. And as I was assessing the marketplace and ultimately started at BritBox towards the end of 22, the thing that was particularly interesting to me about what I call the specialty space is that you can really focus on an individual fandom. And I have some background in looking at fandoms during my time at Hulu, where you find these really intense, slightly smaller audiences, obviously, than the mainstream, but they are super excited about removing friction between themselves and the content that they love, whether that's Japanese anime. I think we probably followed what Sony buying Crunchyroll for north of $1 billion. But you're seeing that in a few different places. And I think where BritBox has an opportunity, and where I see it, and we just crossed 3 million subscribers and announced
Congratulations. That's impressive.
Yeah, thank you very much. We just announced that, is that we can really just focus on an audience that loves high quality content. We happen to source all of it from the UK, which again is growing up in the United States. I wasn't really exposed, nor most Americans were not exposed to British programming. We just don't generally pre-streaming import content onto our broadcast and cable airwaves. What we do, we take adaptations of formats, but everything is really Americanized. And what streaming opened the door to was the content borders have now really dissolved. A year ago, everyone in the world was watching Korean programming. I quote the statistic that I actually find pretty amazing, that Netflix suggested that 60% of their global subscriber base regularly watches Korean programming, and it's not just Squid Game. And so if you see content that's so unique and specific to a one market around the world being consumed in mass around the world, what it suggests is we're all open to things coming from other markets. Now, programming the entire marketplace and trying to appeal to everybody, that's where that's where the cash register really starts going. But if you can pick a lane and really nail your audience, well, there's an opportunity there to be really successful. And fortunately, that's an area of business that I'm in right now that's really exciting.
So let's explore that a little bit more, Robert. And I think you're right to kind of point out what I've been saying for a while really applies to any industry. You really don't want to be in the middle. There's always a collapse in the middle when the industry starts to mature. You either need to have scale like a Netflix or an Amazon, or you need to be, super serving and focused on a particular demographic. I won't even say niche, but, particular, sort of viewer community, which BritBox clearly has done. Let's talk a little bit about acquisition, because that's one of the big acquisition, and I would say also retention. That's one of the big costs, because you want to keep that low so you can profit from the content that you do license or produce. What is your acquisition strategy for BritBox?
Sure. That's a great question. You're right. In any business like ours, there's really two areas of focus. And that's where I try to make sure everyone on the team thinks about every single day, which is, how are we going to acquire our next subscriber, and how do we keep them? And once we keep them, how long can we keep them? And that's really, if you can optimize around those two variables, well, you have a winning business. And it's pretty simplistic, but that's really the focus. So from an acquisition perspective, we have a broad value proposition, which is we are the best in British programming. And so there is an audience out there that loves what we do from that regard. And I think we can lead with that. As we think about expanding our audience, we have moved upstream in terms of our involvement in content from a co-producer and even commissioning capability. And we've started to do some programming that looks a lot like what you'd see on any other mainstream streaming platform or premium cable network. And frankly, you're seeing British programming on all of them anyway, whether you're watching Game of Thrones or Slow Horses on Apple, or the Lord of the Rings show on Amazon. You're watching content with British accents, and not to mention The Crown or Bridgerton on Netflix.
Yep.
we have that happens to be all that we do, but we are definitely stepping into some higher profile programming. A month or so ago, we premiered a show called Stonehouse with Matthew McFadden, who's obviously part of the ensemble of Succession, but this was a leading role for him. And this show on any other streaming platform or premium network would feel at home. It had a premium look and feel, and certainly we led with a face that's very recognizable to premium television watchers in the United States. We just premiered a new series last week called The Confessions of Franny Langton. Again, a show that would look and feel home at any other premium network or streaming service in the United States. And so we're leaning into some of these shows that, yes, are a little bit noisier. In some cases, have faces that are familiar to broader audiences, and we've seen that both to our direct-to-consumer app, but also as we operate on platforms across the scope of aggregated platforms, Amazon, Roku, et cetera. We've seen a great response. As again, people don't necessarily have to always think I'm a fan of British programming to think that's a show that I'd like to watch. And so we're using those shows out there, obviously, to attract audiences. And then once they come in, we can supply them with an incredible richness of our library, which, again, as an American content consumer, if you aren't a self-described Anglophile or fan of British programming, you'd probably be pretty amazed with the depth and richness of the library of content that is, certainly of the same standard or better, frankly, than a lot of mainstream television coming out of the Hollywood system.
Yeah, that it's interesting too. Before I get to my next question, I think it is interesting how much content there is out there. As you pointed out, it's already mainstream. It's already across the sort of content distribution spectrum. And I guess that leads to my next question is, and it's interesting, an interesting case study with BritBox. What is the impetus, or what is the benefit or advantage of packaging that up into its own service as opposed to distribution through all these different other apps and streaming services?
Sure. So BritBox is a joint venture between the BBC and ITV, which are the two largest content companies in the UK. I wasn't there at the impetus. I've only been at the company for a few months, but I think it's a safe assumption to think that, again, controlling their own destiny and reaching their fandoms are probably better with the largest possible base and infrastructure that they can provide, as opposed to the BBC, which, again, I'm speaking for myself, but my gut suggests that probably most people in the US would think about the BBC as a news organization or factual television like Planet Earth or something like that. Whereas an ITV, again, not a huge brand recognition, if any, outside of industry folks, but to bring the richness and breadth of their libraries and content producing capabilities on the scripted side together and go direct to the consumer gives them, an opportunity to grow a subscription service that has millions of subscribers like they've been able to do. So, I'm obviously, very fortunate to have the seat that I'm in right now, but, the genesis of this happened years before I started. And I believe that infrastructure was critical in what we're building today. And I'm fortunate that they came to that conclusion because we have a really great business.
Yeah. I mean, 3 million subs, that's incredible. So, I think it is interesting, the middle ground, we talked about a little bit about viewer acquisition. I'd like to pursue that a little bit more about social and referrals and all that sort of fun stuff. And then we're going to get into the content part. But content discovery seems to be squarely in the middle, and having a dedicated tile service, you might find, hey, I really love British content, and there's these other shows I didn't even know about. And thematically, they pique my interest in a particular way. Talk about that a little bit. What is your strategy for sort of revealing new titles to your viewers once you pull them into the fold, so to speak?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think you would find that we hand manage some of our editorial selections, maybe a bit more than you'd find on a Netflix, which, again, my gut tells me that your Netflix experience looks very different than my Netflix experience, given how algorithmically driven those those user interfaces are. We do have some of that. We certainly have a recommendation engine running, and we promote content to you and merchandise content to you that we believe fits with your past consumption patterns. But ultimately, we do a lot of hand managing editorially of our service as well. And
so manual, human-based curation.
Exactly. So we do
curation.
Yep.
Okay.
So we do a lot of that. We try to tie things to, for example, there's the BAFTAs. We were the exclusive home of the BAFTAs, which the largest awards ceremony celebrating content coming out of the UK. That was several weeks ago, and so we try to package and merchandise content that's relevant to the BAFTAs, whether it's past BAFTA award winners or talent who are in programming that are being celebrated in the BAFTAs. There's a coronation coming up in May. You may have heard about it. There hasn't been one in a while, but there's going to be a new king, or there is a new king that will be coronated officially. So you'll see programming that will tie to that event. And so we try to stay relevant to what's going on both in the UK to give a little bit of a connective tissue for the US and North American consumer back to what's going on in the UK. And we like to program around those events, but also we just like to be relevant to what's going on here as well. So that's yes, there are human beings who are behind a lot of the content decisions that you'll see on the service, and we find that serves our audience well. But again, we're playing in a much narrower lane than some of the larger mainstream services that you might, if you are appealing to children's programming or family programming, or you're appealing, some experience might be for sci-fi fans and some might be fantasy fans and some might be down the middle dramas or comedies. Like, we don't have that same, we certainly have elements of all of that, but I think we can be a lot more direct with our consumers and put the right content in front of them that's relevant within our ecosystem.
It is funny how also the sort of, I wouldn't necessarily call it prevalence, but the presence of British content across these other services. Like, we just binge watched The Crown,
right,
my wife and I, and we loved it. And then we found ourselves, we couldn't get enough. We found ourselves searching for other things about, Princess Margaret and the wedding and the relationship with the media. And we came across probably 5 or 6 other shows and documentaries, which were just fascinating. And we want more too. So we'll definitely be watching the royal wedding. For sure.
The coronation. Yeah. I love,
I'm sorry, the coronation. Sorry.
That's fine. I love
I got The Crown on my brain right now.
Exactly. So. Yeah. Well, I love the fact that British programming is on every other streaming service. I don't think anyone is going to make the effort that we do to develop the depth of the library that we have, but to be able to discover that you actually like British programming, you're curious about certain themes that come about because you discovered a show on another platform, and then you do look for more. And again, we want to be top of mind for that potential subscriber, that consumer, that, hey, when you want to dig more into this topic, there's nobody who's going to do this better than we are. And again, back to that point that I was making about 60% of Netflix's 200 plus million subscriber base is watching Korean programming. I think all the time about that is such a uniquely culturally specific type of content. And back to my Hulu days, I was doing business in Korean programming 10 years before Squid Game was a glimmer in anybody's eye. And I know what the texture of that content in it is, and it's very unique to the culture, not the least of which is the fact that it's in Korean. And so if you're thinking about, okay, I have a grasp of the content coming out of the traditional Hollywood system, but I'm curious about content coming from other content producing centers around the world. The most accessible of that is content that's made in English. So we have the benefit that unless somebody has a really rich, Scottish brogue, you're going to be able to watch it without subtitles and understand what's going on and see exotic locations and have that sort of escapist experience while still being able to understand what they're talking about without having to read subtitles, which is just, again, I think from an accessibility standpoint, should put us at the top of the list.
Yeah, but I mean, to your point about Squid Game, I think that took a lot of the stigma away from subtitles. People just embraced it. I've always loved foreign content and reading subtitles, or even just, not at all, and just kind of, picking up on what's happening through the visuals. Some people can't tune their ear very well to English accents. And so having those subtitles are there. My grandfather was Scottish. He had a very pronounced, from Edinburgh, and not everybody can understand him. So, it's a very helpful thing. And so let's talk about, if you don't mind, if we can shift gears a little bit more towards content and the business model. So you guys are an SVOD, correct?
Correct.
Yep. And so that's the simplest model. Netflix got their start there, and now we hear, talk advertising-based business models, or at least experimentation there, across a lot of different services, looking at hybrid SVOD and AVOD and fast channels. Your business model seems to be working out pretty well for you with 3 million subs. Let's talk about the economics a little bit, and maybe go beyond BritBox and think a little bit about the industry. We are spending billions. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but last year Netflix was like 18 billion, and add in Disney, and I don't know, you could easily get over $50 billion spend. There is some indication that might be retracting a little bit. As I've said in previous podcasts, the adults are in charge now, and we need to make the economics work. Any insight as to how that's going to play out over the next couple of years? How are we going to make the economics of producing all this great content that viewers are hungering for and pay the bills at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question. That's what I was talking about a little bit earlier, and the fact that everyone's reading the same articles and looking at the same earnings reports from traditional media companies who have gone direct to consumer and are spending billions of dollars. I mean, this includes Disney. I mean, these are very established companies who recognize that having a direct relation with the consumer could be a path for them, though, again, in the fullness of time, it should be a profitable path for them. I don't see the price of content production going away. So the question becomes, and this might be slightly controversial, are there too many mainstream streaming services? Do you see a retraction in the number of services, or even from Bob Iger made a comment even this week about, hey, maybe we made a mistake about whether we should be keeping everything exclusive to our own owned and operated service versus selling some of our content to other places. So look, if I had a great answer for you, I would tell you, but ultimately, I think some of these business models will go through iterations, and what you're seeing now, which is maybe some protectionism going on around content that any specific studio is producing and saying that has to go to our service. Maybe that gets loosened up a little bit as folks realize that, we were talking about it before. If you have a value proposition to your consumer, that you have a very extensive content library, and you pepper that with some noisier programming that can get some attention, and then it just becomes a bit of a science around how to retain audiences between those gaps of those noisier programs, then maybe it takes some of the pressure off of having to pay exclusive rates for everything that you have on your service. That would be my speculation, is that you're going to have to spend a bit less. And again, of course, marketing, that's a huge component as well. And often you're marketing to the same people, and there are only so many channels there as well. So the question is, how do folks get really fine-tuned and precise in terms of how they market? So again, the only way these businesses work and how they get valued appropriately is if they can demonstrate that there is some escape from what we call the trough of the J curve, which is, hey, we're in an investment period now, but at some point, with scale and more precision around spend, both on the content and the marketing side, you're going to start to see a healthier business model. And certainly it took some time for Netflix to get there, and they had a massive first mover advantage in that regard, and no other legacy business to service, which is important to note. I think where I may be going with that is there may not be as many services over time if they can't get themselves a clear path to get to a business that investors can see their way out of. But I certainly think some of the spend has to come back a bit, and it just may mean a different mix of of content.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing is maybe not a complete retraction, but experimentation. And someone reminded me that if you look at the early days of cable and broadcasting, there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of things evolved over time, and then you had different revenue streams, and we're seeing that happening in the streaming services right now, where we're jumping to fast, and then they're like, well, wait a minute, should we be pulling all this content away from our paying SVOD subscribers? There's some revolt there, like they're not happy with that. And then does everything have to be this exclusive walled garden, or can we license some of our content through third-party distribution? And it's okay. I mean, I think at the end of the day, as long as everybody's making money and consumers can easily find the content that they want and enjoy, it's good for the industry. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ultimately, you can't avoid the sort of the major overhang of cord cutting is happening. And so I don't believe fundamentally that people are going to watch any less content than they ever watched before. And as a matter of fact, they're probably going to watch more content because better content and more targeted content continues to be produced. So we're not necessarily just playing for the mainstream. I mean, talking about the community, the ecosystem is not necessarily just saying, how can we get a giant share of the market with this show. You're seeing shows that are produced or in some cases acquired from other markets that are more precisely targeted towards specific smaller cohorts of audience. That's a fantastic thing for consumers. The question ultimately is how do you create business models that can make sense of all of that? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, you are going to see rebundling. You're going to see different types of ways that consumers interact with their content. I think you can look at some of these aggregated platforms like Amazon selling channels and what that does and how that can amplify a business of a bunch of disparate services like ours, for that matter, and provide a very easy opportunity for consumers to find what they're looking for and a marketing channel to reach those consumers that would otherwise be probably much more expensive and just noisy. And as the ecosystem continues to evolve, and you see, again, whether it's Amazon or Roku or anywhere else developing these channel platforms, again, the cost to get to that consumer is going to come down. Now, you lose something with that also as a service like ours, like a direct relationship with the customer, some data. You probably, I mean, everyone wants their data, right? And everyone knows that. I mean, that's been sort of the constant refrain here. And there is no real Nielsen for the SVOD service. I know they track content, but that's a surface level review of what matters to these services. I think ultimately, just because somebody is watching a lot of a certain show, especially in an SVOD and a non-ad supported environment, it doesn't necessarily mean that they need a lot more of that in order to satisfy their business model. They may have hit their fill of a certain type of programming and then can focus on other things. So again, it's not as simple as just, we have a defined programming grid, we're going to fill it with the content that gets the most ads. These business models are, and the way to think about really the chessboard of what content to acquire, how much to spend on it, what's the content that you have to buy to retain audiences, what to spend on that, how much to put towards marketing, like that science, everyone is constantly trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And I think, ultimately the consumer has to win. I don't think you're going to see an environment where you go back to just more mass market content. I think we all now have, whatever the numbers are right now, multiple subscription services per household is the norm in this market. I think back to not just 15 years ago, but even back to 2010 when we were launching Hulu Plus. Like, that was just getting people to take credit cards out of their wallet and subscribe to any service was a new thing. I mean, remember, Netflix went streaming. They already had 10 million subscribers or more in their DVD by mail business. So the times now are very different. Consumers get it. They're paying for things. Now it's just a function of, I think your point is the right question to ask, which is how to get to the business models that make sense. We can continue to be satisfied as consumers. It's I think it's moving in the right direction, but we'll see, I think, as you put it correctly, some experimentation and some trials of different ways to get consumers connected with the content they love. Again, that's exciting to be both on this side of the table and as a consumer, because I like watching content as much as anybody else. And I like interesting ways to get it. And I like to try new services and experience new ways of experiencing new stories being told. So all of that is good for consumers, and we'll see more and more of that, but maybe in a slightly different way that in terms of how we pay for it going forward.
Okay. So I got a couple more questions before we're out of time here. One is, we have this dynamic of content and viewer acquisition and trying to make it all work and everything. And then we have these other sub-trends that are shaping the industry as well. What do you think is going to change in the industry with the rise of connected TVs? And all the streaming services are trying to get their tile top of mind on the homepage and everything else. You talked about data, you talked about marketing. How is that sort of thrust in the industry going to change things in the future if you were to look into your crystal ball, 2 or 3 years out?
Well, again, it goes back to some of what I was saying before, because that tile placement it isn't free. So fundamentally, I remember the early days of placement on, like, literally the physical placement on a remote that was up for sale in some of these early connected TVs or boxes that were out there. And now you're going to pay for promotional placement, and sometimes that's going to be part of a deal. But sometimes you're also just going to see that as a easier path to the consumer. But in every household you have them, and that business model for those you see Roku is turned from a set-top box maker really to an OS for televisions, and certainly Google and Samsung and others Vizio have figured out that you don't have to take a lot of principal risk when you speak to such a large audience and you give them choice on and sell those positions. I mean, it probably makes more sense than buying content, which is certainly a phase that folks have been in the past. So, again, it's making it easier for consumers to get content. That's for sure. Time will tell where the business models evolve. I suspect that, again, you will see bundles emerge from these products such that churn mitigation is sort of top of mind. And if maybe one service isn't doing its work this month, but you're part of some bundle and another service picks up the slack in another month, you don't necessarily churn out or unsubscribe from the broader bundle. So I suspect that you'll start seeing some of that come around. And again, just like big cable television and the big bundle worked for so long, I suspect, and I don't think this is a novel prediction, you'll start seeing some more of that, which again can benefit the services in the long term if it turns into both an acquisition opportunity, but also as a churn mitigator. I don't think that gets as much play in the market, either the churn side of things or the bouncing in and out of services that may be serviced by being part of a broader bundle as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about engagement a little bit, Robert. There's other sort of externalities around just the, linear distribution of, create content, push it out, acquire viewers, especially when you look at services like BritBox that have sort of highly engaged communities. They know what they're looking for. What role can, say, social media play to, pull in viewers, to keep them engaged? I notice when my family's watching the Oscars or my wife's watching The Bachelor, they're on social at the same time, chatting with their friends, and they're also watching the show. How do you tap into that to kind of keep your viewers fully engaged?
Oh, that's great. I mean, we have a social team in-house at our place. I think that's sort of table stakes at this point. We had, if you were watching the BAFTAs, we were running a social program in parallel. We actually had people on the ground in London while that was going on. When I, again, take a step back from just a ecosystem perspective, I think where we may have gotten it wrong with binge viewing is removing one of the more critical components of television consumption, which is the communal experience of watching television together. And we see it pop up every once in a while. I think, frankly, HBO does a really good job of this because they haven't really bought in to that model that, was White Lotus was rolling out, for example. You were seeing that became water cooler conversation. And I was frankly afraid that was going to go away, but we still see some moments of that. But I think social can fill in some of those gaps. And I'm a strong proponent of just, again, taking some risk and being clever. I mean, I'm not saying at BritBox, we have an entirely earnest experience, but it is, British crime and mystery for the most part, but we can be a little bit more irreverent and lean into the memes and lean into some behavior on our social platform that may not exactly live within our app itself, but it's an introduction, it's marketing, it gives people something to talk around, talk to, and that's exciting. And look, being able to service fandoms is critical. And when you look at our churn at BritBox, I can speak about my service, which is incredibly low. I think a meaningful part of that is a connection that our users, our subscribers have with the content, and to be able to facilitate that both within your platform as well as out where people are spending their time outside of just watching content. If you can make your shows and your content part of the conversation, you have an opportunity to just keep that viewer engaged again from a retention, both as from an acquisition standpoint and a retention standpoint. It's all in service of the business. And again, I think we all have fun looking at what interesting social posts come out about all of the content that we enjoy, and I think that maybe brings back some of that lost water cooler moment that we probably are all missing, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah. Well, the coronation is going to be huge. That'll be a great test of the full strategy there from social and live streaming, all that fun stuff. So that's something to look forward to. I'm excited about that. So we're almost out of time here, Robert. Sure. One of the things we like to do with these podcasts, where we really talk to leaders of the industry, is to personalize them a little bit. Thank you for insights in the industry. Love to learn a little bit about you, a hobby or interest or something that folks might find interesting. Sure.
Well, anyone knows me. I mean, we've actually probably gone way over from when we would typically talk about this, but I am, I'm very into pizza, both as a consumer and a creator of pizza. I have a significant pizza oven in my backyard here in Scarsdale, New York. And what I say to people is, I make my own dough, I make my own sauce. I'm very serious about it, and wow. I've really fine-tuned it to my personal taste, my family's taste, and I think most of my guests are either polite or they enjoy it as well. But I will say there is certainly pizza out there that I like better than mine, but there's definitely people who make pizza for a living whose pizza is not as good as mine. So if you
very diplomatic answer. What is your pizza oven? Is it like a brick oven type of deal in your backyard, or?
It's made by a company called Gosney. It's called the Gosney Dome. I'm not getting paid for that plug, but it is a great piece of machinery. And it's a standalone dual fuel, so you can use wood in it. But at very high heat, actually, wood. It's a novelty, and it looks cool at parties, but the fact of the matter, it's difficult to maintain. So I tend to use, you can either use propane or they have natural gas units as well. And yeah, they make pizzas at north of 900 degrees or anything. Actually, they're very high heat ovens. And when you talk in a typical house, you're not going to see heat more than probably 550 degrees in a typical oven. And so you can cook steaks in a cast iron skillet at near 1,000 degrees. You can make, like I said, pizzas in 90 seconds. And that's the big difference between home cooking and restaurant cooking is really heat. Commercial kitchens have very high heat ovens or finishing ovens at steakhouses, things like that, that'll get up to 1,000 degrees or more. And obviously pizza oven, wood fired or even gas fired pizza ovens If you go to like a Neapolitan pizzeria, those are firing off at north of 900 degrees. You just can't replicate that in a home.
Is that just the speed with which you cook, or does it bring out the flavor in a different way at higher temperatures?
Oh, it's just that is. Yeah, I mean, if you want to make a Neapolitan pizza or something that resembles that, I mean, you have to cook it. It cooks that fast at that level heat. Again, you use there's special flour. You want to use 00 flour, and it just brings out a different crust profile. And that's you can't replicate that in a home oven, even with a pizza stone. You could certainly you can do it, but you can't make something that resembles what you get at a restaurant at a home oven temperature. So, yep, if I'm not talking about content or trying to build a British content service, I'm making pizzas in my backyard.
That's so cool. Maybe you could do your own podcast on making pizzas in your backyard. I'd watch it.
Thank you. Well, that's one.
You got to start somewhere, right? It's funny. We invested 6 years ago in a backyard pool and pool house and everything. Right now, I just have a grill, but I always had a plan to eventually put in a pizza oven in the back.
Oh, well, I can help you with that.
Yeah, we should talk offline.
I don't even have a grill. I find if somebody wants to make burgers, I can go to their house. But I mean, I make steaks in the pizza oven in a cast iron skillet that are as good or better than anything you would get at a restaurant. So I feel pretty well served by this one utility. It's sort of a fascinating rabbit hole to go down, but pizza makes people happy. Who doesn't want to be happy?
No kid. Is there a bar or like a patio table where I could sit and watch the process as it cooks?
Absolutely. Come and visit. You're welcome.
All right. Very, very cool, Robert. On that note, we're gonna finish our podcast. It's a great conversation. We could talk for hours. Your background at CBS and Hulu and really, sort of at the inflection points of the industry over the years is really fascinating. Who knows where the industry is going in the future, but I see some good things and some maturing in terms of the business model and experimentation. So it's good. Great conversation, Robert. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Awesome. Robert Schildhouse, the GM for North America for BritBox. This is Brian Mahoney, CEO of Trend Research and president of OTT Executive Podcast. Signing off, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.